Some guns earn a reputation for reliability, others for performance, but a few become infamous for all the wrong reasons. Whether it's jamming under pressure, falling apart at the range, or failing in the field, these are the firearms that just couldn't cut it. What's up, everyone? This is Ted from Line 45, and today I'm breaking down 10 guns that have let shooters down time and time again with issues you just can't ignore. Before I start, I would really appreciate it if you would push those buttons below, the subscribe button, the notification bell, all of them. This is not necessary, but those little clicks help a brother out. Plus, it pushes me to give you more valuable car-related content on your screen. Now, buckle up, and let's get back to the video. Remington 51 Reals, Gen 1. You don't forget a gun that locks up on you during a defensive drill. That was my introduction to the first-generation model of the Remington R51, a pistol that looked sharp and felt great in the hand but fell apart where it counted most, which is on the range. Remington priced it around $390 and pitched it as a modern reboot of their old Model 51 with that same rare Pedersen hesitation-locked action. The low-bore axis, fixed barrel, and sleek alloy frame had my interest. It was light, just over 22 ounces, and slim enough to disappear inside the waistband. On paper, it had every reason to work, but the gun was a mechanical mess. The hesitation lock system, while interesting, demanded tight tolerances. What we got was the opposite: feed failures, extraction issues, out-of-battery hammer drops. This wasn't the kind of pistol you trusted when things mattered. The cam system and internal locking block wore down way too quickly, and the slide had a nasty habit of freezing mid-cycle. I even had one jam that locked the slide so tight I needed tools to get it moving again. The trigger felt soft and unpredictable, and the slide release was hit or miss. Even after Remington sent out their fix, I knew the damage was done. Most shooters I talked to just shelved it and moved on. You could feel that the design had potential, but what we got wasn't finished. It left a lot of folks disappointed, and more importantly, unarmed when it mattered. Now let's get into a micro pistol that looked premium but needed match-grade ammo just to make it through a mag. Kimber Solo Carry. Kimber's Solo Carry looked like the answer to a question a lot of folks were asking back in the early 2010s. How do you get a 9mm into something that feels like a pocket pistol without giving up style or quality? On the surface, the Solo seemed to check every box. Compact at just 5.5 inches long, stainless steel slide, aluminum frame, ambidextrous controls, nice finish, and it rode really smooth in a leather IWB rig. It wasn't cheap either. It was around $725 retail, but once you started putting rounds through it, the cracks showed fast. Mine hated everything but 124 grain or 147 grain premium ammo. Lighter loads or anything outside that narrow diet. Instant failure to feed or stovepipe. Kimber even printed it in the manual, basically saying, "Don't expect this to run unless you feed it high-end hollow points. That's not what you want in a carry pistol." The Solo used a short recoil locked breech system with dual recoil springs that felt over-tensioned. Racking the slide was stiff, and the tolerances were tight in all the wrong ways. Mag release would sometimes dump the mag under recoil, and the trigger? Long pull, no clean wall, and reset so vague it felt like guessing. The frame looked good, but the internals showed wear after a few boxes of ammo. It never gave me confidence. A concealed carry gun that needs perfect conditions, specific ammo, and constant attention is basically not a sidearm for me. That's a liability. Next, you should see this next rimfire pistol that felt like it was built more for a toy aisle than a range bag. Taurus PT22. I picked up a Taurus PT22 years ago thinking it'd make a fun little pocket pistol for plinking or maybe deep concealment. Lightweight, cheap, and chambered in .22 LR, it looked like a simple tool I could toss in a tackle box or glove compartment. It had that tip-up barrel, which seemed like a neat feature at first. Just press a lever, and the barrel flips open for loading the first round. No slide racking needed. For folks with weak hands or older shooters, it sounded convenient. But once you shoot it, the charm fades fast. Taurus built it without an extractor, which means it relies purely on blowback pressure to kick the spent casing out. That works fine when the ammo's hot and the chamber's clean. Problem is, the .22 LR isn't known for consistency, and this gun choked constantly on anything but high-velocity rounds. Light strikes, failures to feed, stovepipes, you name it. I had one session where I was clearing jams more than I was firing. When a rimfire semi-auto won't cycle properly, and you have to pry rounds out with your fingernail or a pocket knife, it stops being a fun range day real quick. The double-action only trigger is long, heavy, and gritty. It drags your groups off target unless you really bear down on it. Safety is mushy, the slide feels loose, and the frame finish wears faster than it should. I wanted it to work. It just never gave me a reason to keep trusting it. Coming up next, let's talk about a rifle that tried to modernize a classic but ended up dragging its own reputation down. Armalite, a 180 billion reals. I had high hopes for the Armalite AR-180B. The idea of a lightweight, piston-driven alternative to the AR-15 with historical roots was enough to get me curious. Chambered in 5.56, this thing came with a 16.25-inch barrel, weighed around 6.5 pounds unloaded, and used a polymer lower mated to a steel upper. It kept the dual recoil spring setup and had that distinctive side-charging handle riding on the bolt carrier. Priced around $700 back in the day, it looked like a no-frills rifle you could trust. That didn't last long. The big issue was the polymer lower. It felt cheap in a way that didn't inspire confidence. I watched mine develop stress lines around the buffer tube housing and cracks forming near the rear takedown pin after a few range days. The hinge between the upper and lower started to loosen up, and by the third outing, it felt like I was shooting a clamshell. Magazine fitment was inconsistent, and it wouldn't take some mil-spec mags unless you forced them. Internally, tolerances were all over the place. One rifle might run great, another would keyhole rounds or suffer from short stroking due to poor gas block alignment. The proprietary parts didn't help either. You couldn't just toss in AR-15 fire control parts or swap out the stock without major work. If anything went wrong, you were stuck hunting for spares nobody stocked. Of course, I believed that the AR-180B had potential, but the build quality and design shortcuts killed it. It left more shooters frustrated than satisfied. Next up, Colt All-American 2000. The Colt All-American 2000 felt like Colt's late attempt to stay relevant in a market that was already passing them by. Designed with input from Eugene Stoner and Reed Knight, it had pedigree on paper. But what ended up in shooters' hands was a pistol that looked modern but functioned like a bad prototype. It used a rotary barrel locking system and came with a double-action-only trigger. Capacity was solid at 15+1, and it was built around a polymer frame with a steel slide, measuring just over 7 inches in length. Sounds like it should have worked. But the problem started the moment rounds started chambering. The action never felt smooth. That rotary barrel would lock up mid-cycle more times than I can count, and even full metal jacket ammo didn't always run clean. The trigger pull was a slog. It was heavy, long, and with zero predictability. It felt more like a staple gun than a pistol. You'd press and then suddenly the shot breaks somewhere deep in that gritty pull. Reset is basically non-existent. Then there was the grip. It looked like Colt tried to be futuristic, but it ended up oversized and awkward, with a weird angle that threw off natural aim. Even basic functions like the mag release and slide lock had rough edges, both literally and mechanically. Field stripping felt like solving a puzzle no one asked for. It had the Colt name, but none of the Colt confidence. For a pistol meant to compete with Glock, it barely competed with itself. This time, let me introduce you to a compact carry gun that turned a promising gas-delayed system into a takedown nightmare. Walther CCP Gen 1. The Walther CCP Gen 1 was one of those pistols I really wanted to like. It had good bones, a fixed barrel, slim profile, and a delayed blowback system that Walther called soft coil. On the shelf, it felt great in the hand. About 6.4 inches long with an 8-round magazine, it seemed built for concealed carry. It came in around $470. And I thought the fixed barrel would help tighten up groups and soften recoil. What caught my interest was that gas-delayed system. Not something you see often in a striker-fired 9mm, but on the range, it was another story. The gun started getting sluggish after just a couple of mags. The system bleeds gas under the barrel through a port, and when carbon builds up, it throws the whole rhythm off. Mine started choking on basic ball ammo, failure to extract, stovepipes, and weak ejection, especially if the slide didn't get a full stroke. It felt like it needed to be cleaned every 50 rounds just to keep functioning. Then there's the takedown. Walther made it so you needed a special tool to field strip it, not something you want to deal with at the bench or in the field. That tiny rear latch wore fast and could snap if you weren't careful. Reassembly was no picnic either, and I've seen more than one shooter pinch a spring or misalign the slide during the process. The ergonomics were solid, but none of that matters when reliability keeps creeping into your head with every mag. Unfortunately, this isn't the last gun on this list. Century Arms C308. The Century Arms C308 looked like a solid deal for anyone wanting a G3-style battle rifle without the price tag. Chambered in .308 and built using a mix of surplus CCP parts and American-made components, it had that old-school Cold War aesthetic. Barrel length was 18 inches, overall length around 42 inches, and it weighed in at just over 9 pounds. It came with a stamped steel receiver, polymer furniture, and a fluted chamber. MSRP usually sat around $700, but plenty were found for less. It accepted cheap surplus mags and had that rugged roller-delayed blowback action. But none of that helped when the rifle couldn't stay reliable past the first few boxes of ammo. The biggest issue came down to quality control. Because Century used surplus CCP parts, some decades old, and tried to marry them with new, US-made receivers, tolerances were all over the place. Trunnion misalignment, canted sights, and uneven welds were common complaints. I watched one C308 fail to chamber properly due to a poorly fitted bolt carrier that dragged across the rails. Another had a bolt gap so out of spec it chewed through brass and beat itself to pieces after a few hundred rounds. The trigger pack felt gritty and inconsistent, and the paddle mag release, while present on some models, wasn't always installed right. Even little things like the cocking tube or recoil spring would show signs of wear early. Accuracy was mediocre, but more importantly, reliability was unpredictable. You never knew if your next range trip would be smooth or full of stoppages and parts that felt loose. Next up is a handgun that's become a pop culture icon but constantly gets sidelined by real-world reliability issues. And I guess that you know what gun I am talking about. Desert Eagle .50A. The Desert Eagle .50AE is one of those guns every shooter knows by sight, even if they've never fired one. I spent a few long sessions with one, and I'll say this. It's loud, it's heavy, and when it works, it feels like launching a baseball bat from your hands. Built with a massive gas-operated system, it uses a rotating bolt, fixed barrel, and a recoil impulse that reminds you it's not meant for casual shooting. It stretches over 10.75 inches, weighs about 72 ounces unloaded, and the 7-round magazine feels like a steel brick. Now, the issue isn't that the Desert Eagle lacks engineering. It's that all that engineering demands ideal conditions. The gas system gets fouled fast, especially when you're burning through .50 AE loads that leave residue behind like a black powder cannon. Once it's dirty, function becomes unpredictable. Mine started short-stroking halfway through a box of rounds. The slide wouldn't fully cycle, and occasionally it would catch the spent casing halfway out. Add in the fact that the gun is incredibly sensitive to grip, and if you limp wrist even slightly, it won't extract properly. The magazine can be temperamental too. If it's not seated just right or the spring starts to lag, expect feeding issues. Racking that massive slide takes real effort, and if you're not squared up, it will punish your hand. It's a showpiece, not a workhorse. It belongs in movies and maybe on a mantle, but as a go-to for function and reliability, I would never count on it.